I am now going to hand over to Ray Middleton, who's who's a workforce development specialist with Ladder for Life, and looks like he's sitting in glorious sunshine. Lucky him.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'll just get my screen up because we're going to share some slideshow. Play from the start. So thanks, Mark. I'm Ray Middleton, Dr. Ray Middleton, and I'm passionate about workforce development. I've worked in the area, the sector of multiple disadvantage for getting on for 30 years. For the last 20 years, I've been involved in writing and delivering training. That's what I do full time now. I'm going to share what I've learned about what the workforce need to work effectively with people with multiple disadvantage or complex trauma histories. If anybody's interested in the kind of training I'm going to outline in the next 20 minutes, the program I've developed, just drop me an email. I'm happy to chat to people about what I can offer in various ways. But over that course of my life, I suppose, course of that working life, there's been a lot of changes. You know, the world is constantly changing, isn't it? And as I've come across different approaches, what I think is an integrated approach is really important to do, because it's very difficult working with people with multiple disadvantage. It's complex, but I'm always hopeful. I'm very enthusiastic and hopeful about the work. So I'm going to share what I've learned. A little bit about my background. I've always, I've worked at various jobs. You know, I've managed personality disorder services, personality disorder accommodation services. I've been a care coordinator in an early intervention in psychosis service. Obviously, I've done a PhD, so I'm a Dr. Ray Middleton, but not the kind of doctor that is any good if you collapse on an aeroplane. I had a look at the alternatives to diagnosis, really, and trauma-informed alternatives, narrative approaches, rather than giving people the label or the diagnosis of personality disorder. So I looked at kind of trauma-informed and narrative approaches. And I was also the workforce development lead for 8 years at Fulfilling Lives, which was the predecessor to some of you here will know, Changing Futures came along after that. So for 8 years, I was working there. So I've mainly worked either on the front line or managing services. And there's a lot of emotional wear and tear, and that gave me a lot of concern for the welfare of staff, really. You know, when you're managing staff, working with people with multiple disadvantages, there's a lot of emotional wear and tear. So it's important to have a very robust and lots of layers to your workforce development program. I think that's a better approach than training. It is training, but you need more than that. You need ongoing support for staff to develop their skills and stay well and emotionally centered themselves. Fulfilling Lives in Newcastle and Gateshead, sadly, we had 10% of the people we worked with died, which is not a good outcome. But that has an emotional impact on the staff who are trying to form relationships of trust with people, obviously. And you need to look after the staff if they're going to reach out and form relationships of trust with people who've had their trust broken, many times by people in their lives, but also by services and systems that have let them down as well. So here's what I've learned. There's just some contact details there, but I'm going to share a bit there. I draw on a number of different innovative approaches. The power threat meaning framework, I'll share a little bit of the detail about that in a minute. Dialogical approaches from Western Lapland that underlie some open dialogue approaches that are being piloted in the UK now. I helped to run a pilot of that about 10 years ago. But it's great news that that's being piloted in some mental health trusts in the UK now. But also cross-cultural dialogues on homelessness. That was a book edited by Jay Levy, who does a very innovative approach to working with rough sleepers in America. I had a chapter in that book, Cross-Cultural Dialogues on Homelessness, about my approach to helping the workforce develop, train and develop their skills. And Robin Johnson also co-edited that book, and he was the originator of Psychologically Formed Environments, or PI, which again is a very helpful approach to helping services develop if you're going to be reaching out to people with more complex trauma histories, to do that effectively and not just end up as services that so often mirror the chaos and confusion of the people that they're reaching out to. We want the staff to be well and centered and looked after so that they can do effective work. But it's difficult to do that well. So in practice, what have I found, having written and delivered training for about 20 years in this area? The best approach is to combine innovative approaches to workforce development and not just have one approach. What I've done is I've brought the best ideas, I think, from Europe, America, and the UK. I'll say what they are in a moment. Staff need knowledge and skills around working with complex trauma, obviously, if you're going to be working with multiple disadvantage. But also, staff need help to have the language, the concepts, and the frameworks to discuss how power is operating in people's lives. So people need frameworks that are not just looking at what's going on for the individual, but what's going on in society. The ability to look at social justice issues and be actively kind of aware of that and seeing how power is operating in the lives of themselves as a service and a staff member, but also in the lives of the people they're getting alongside to reach. And I think for many years that was missing in the workforce development, and still largely is, I think, is the capacity to have a framework that allows us to talk about how power operates in society. You know, the economic system we're in, the powerful processes like racism, how class works. And so you need a psychological model that can talk about trauma, but can also talk about social powers at work. And I think that would create a radical and empowered workforce that aren't feeling burnt out, but able to kind of engage with the active issues in our society at the moment, if we're reaching out to help people to change. Because there's a reason why this issue has been around for so many decades, why people with multiple disadvantages end up going in a revolving door, in and out of services, but not really having a good outcome in general. So we need a really well-informed, trained and radically skilled workforce who can talk about power as well as talk about trauma. I've developed this program of training, a workforce development training program. It draws on ideas from trauma-informed, open dialogue, narrative approaches, PI, pre-treatment, reflective practice is essential. You need that if you're going to be working there to reflect on your own thoughts and feelings, that emotional wear and tear, to make sense of it, so you don't end up waking up at 2 a.m. thinking about a client who's chopped their ear off. Those sorts of things. You need to be able to, be centered and have a good work-life balance, and not be acting out outside of work the secondary trauma that you've been experiencing in the work. That's really important. So the program's been evaluated by the College of Health and Science at University of Lincoln, and that's their evaluation of my program's been delivered in various places at the moment. It'll be out in early 2024. It'd be good to see what they find about the impact on staff and the people we have the privilege to get alongside and journey with for a while and try and help. A key factor to make an effective worker includes great relationship building skills with different groups of people and services, but we also need the ability to understand systems and how power works in systems. People need to understand the impact of trauma more widely within the system and not just on the person they're reaching out to. That's really important, but also how the system is often, and services and staff in other bits of the services are often reacting themselves. They're being triggered or having a threat response to their own anxieties about working in this area. So we need a comprehensive workforce development program, would be my take on this, having kind of been developing it for a long time and delivering services and working directly with people for a few decades. So there's a Russian guy called Vygotsky, and I'm going to sum him up in a sentence. He says, if we're going to develop someone, we need to get where people are at first and then stretch them a bit, but don't stretch them too much, otherwise we lose them. And I think there's a lot in that. So we need all staff, we need to reach where they are at first and connect with what's important to them. And all staff working with multiple and complex trauma histories or multiple disadvantage, they have a personal story or narrative that leads them to work in this sector. And this motivates them and connects them to what they believe in and what they value, their values. So that's really important to find out what people value, what's driving them. Because if you're going to work for any length of time in this sector, your values are going to be really important, and connect that to your narrative. Why are you working in this area? This is key to connect with if you're going to develop the workforce. To help someone else with their story, when we reach out, people with multiple disadvantage, we need to understand our own story and why we're working in this area. I know my own journey was motivated because I experienced a lot of trauma in my childhood. And then I ended up in the psychiatric hospital 7 times. I had a period of long-term unemployment in my early 20s. And then I ended up having lots of diagnoses of psychiatric disorders, which I didn't find helpful, lots of medication, which I didn't find helpful. And then I found ways to get better. I gave up alcohol and drugs, found ways to get better, and ended up working in the sector then. And that's what drove me, my passion, I suppose, to work in various jobs for quite a long period of time. But that's what I mean about people. We need to know what our values are that are driving us. They'll be different for different people. And what is our story that keeps us going when it's very tough, and keeps us well and centered. And so I think it's important to understand personal narrative, because often people are stuck in their stories when we get alongside people to try and reach out to them with multiple disadvantage. They are stuck, or they're lost, or they feel trapped. And there's lots of reasons for that. Some of them are kind of anxious loops that they're caught in themselves. But some of the traps are also of society's making, like various rules about, we won't give you a service until you give up drinking and taking drugs, or various versions. We heard Sue talking about one earlier, didn't we, about the different approaches where maybe people need housing first, and then see maybe alcohol and drugs as an understandable response to the threats people have in their lives. I'm not saying it's not a problem, but we could see it as part of a holistic narrative of someone's life, that they've developed certain threat responses, which might have helped them survive for a while, when they were overwhelmed with guilt, anger, shame, fear, those kind of strong emotions. Shame is such a big emotion, isn't it? That gets stirred up when we're trying to help people get better. Often that stirs up shame, which isn't named, but it's a strong emotion where people relapse and go backwards then, because it feels more comfortable to stay in that kind of stuck place often than the fear of failure, of stepping out, getting a house, maybe getting a home, getting some work experience, maybe tackling some of those addiction problems. That's a much scarier, anxiety-provoking place to be in than the familiar, rut of a loop that we're trapped in, about maybe feeling anxious and then drinking, taking drugs, maybe, or being roughly. People, it's a complex thing to go on a journey to transition into a good life. And we want people to have a good life, don't we? We want people to have a better life. We want people to get a life, basically. We don't want just to get alongside people while they die and struggle. We want things to get better. And I think things can get better, but it's complicated. It's not easy, because it's to do with how society is, as well as how people are, inside internal issues and external issues as well. So I've developed a picture, which is a very simple picture about going on a journey. It's only got 6 questions to it, 6 parts to it, but it helps us understand our personal journey or story, like a quest. And we can think about the clients. And here's a couple of images from that picture that I've developed. So I usually either give this out on a postcard. I have developed an app with this picture on as well that you can get on your phone, but it just needs a little bit of improving, I think. It is kind of live, but I need to just make it a bit more user friendly before I kind of make it publicly available. But you've got a postcard that I usually give out, or images of this. So basically, you can envisage, how would you like your life to be better in the future? Your preferred hopes, or your best hopes. What's in the way? These sound like quite simple questions, but the point is, when I've been working directly with people who are like taking an overdose in front of me, or threatening to kill me, or various things, they're expressing their distress in ways that provoke anxiety in me. It's very difficult for me to think of a complicated framework or model in those moments of time, or those tricky situations when I'm feeling anxious because I'm with someone who's feeling anxious. And so a simple model is helpful, but within a simple model, you can have a lot of complexity and depth. But this is just kind of saying, we want to help people see how they'd like their life to be better in the future. What sorts of things are in the way? There could be lots of answers there. What emotions are getting stirred up? I mentioned a few of them: anger, guilt, but also there might be some hope. We want hope for people, don't we? What and who helps? So that's where often we want services and staff to be in this category, about adding to people's help. But also other things can help. All sorts of things can help, about access to powerful resources. What access to powerful resources have people got? We can think about the story so far that is crucial. Often that's where the roots of the trapped loop that people get caught in are, where people have found that every time I try to get a house, I get anxious. I fall in with the wrong crowd. Maybe my house is taken over. There'll be different answers to this for different people. But as I try to get my life better, there's a reason for getting into a loop of trappedness, where I maybe drink too much, take drugs, or something goes on, or I end up getting taken advantage of by other people, or I end up getting arrested, so there's a lot of different answers to this, but in the story so far are the clues to why people are stuck. Usually it might be that I've been very traumatized by abuse by authority figures, either sexual abuse or physical, emotional abuse. And so it's hard to engage with support workers because I see them as an authority figure. So it stirs up in me this feeling of mistrust, of uncomfortableness. It might be attachment issues. But in the story so far are some of the clues to doing things differently in the future, because often we use our past experiences are turned into future expectations, aren't they, about what might happen in the future. And so we need to kind of help people to reflect on this and to maybe do things a little bit differently, or try doing things a bit differently with support. And the next steps is the last bit of that kind of framework called a quest journey, because that's really important, because often people think about a great life they'd like in the future, like maybe getting a home, a job, a relationship, these sorts of things, the good life, whatever that is. But they feel overwhelmed then because they think that journey's too hard to go on. I've gone on it before. It stirs up lots of emotional feelings like a sense of failure, shame, guilt. And so it's better to look at the next steps with support that are achievable to increase people's motivation rather than the usual process. And we can all do this ourselves, can't we? Look at a big hope for the future and then feel, well, I feel overwhelmed. I won't go on that journey. I'll just kind of go back to what seems familiar, what I did yesterday. So another element, if you're going to help the workforce develop, you really need to have good reflective practice, both one-to-one and in a group. And I have a course on that, and I teach that. I've been teaching that to Devon NHS Trust for about 8 years now, to their adult psychology department. And they're also doing the workforce development program as they're reaching out to, in a new way, to services, reaching out to people who are homeless, which is great to hear of an NHS Trust doing a significant attempt to reach out and not just paying a bit of lip service and putting a couple of staff in there, which isn't fair on the staff, really. You need to make a significant investment to reach out to this group of people. But there's lots of people working outside of mental health services that are doing a really good work as well. And we can equally help them develop their knowledge and skills and build on what they do know. So reflective practice is a really important set of skills for someone in the team needs to have in order to help the team reflect and stay centered and emotionally well. Also, PI is part of my program, Psychologically Informed Environments. I've had the privilege of knowing Robin Johnson for years, actually. So I met Robin in Leeds, actually. I was asked to show him around homeless services about 20 years ago. I was managing a personality disorder service. I remember it well. I was really stressed out. I was pretty burnt out, as I usually was doing this kind of work. And I felt a bit resentful, if I'm honest. Someone said, "Oh, could you show this guy around from the local government, department down in, central government, the Department of Communities and Local Government." So Robin came up. He was doing a review for them about multiple, complex trauma, personality disorder, homelessness. Why are these people, this group of people, revolving around the system? So it's been a problem for decades, this. And I really didn't want to show Robin around Leeds homeless services because I was too busy. And my wife said, "You should show him around, really." So I blocked my day off and showed Robin around places like St. George's Crypt and other services. And from that and other things, I've known Robin for 20 years. And from that set of ideas, developed what's now called Psychologically Informed Environments, or PI. There's lots of free access to free resources on pilink.net. You can look that up. And it looks at things like what is the training and support needed? And it might be, there's lots of new things coming along all the time. So you need to make sure it's the most recent, up-to-date, helpful combination of things. Psychological understanding, I'm going to say a little bit about what that is. It helps to think about the spaces of opportunity. So that's helping staff to think about what are the spaces of opportunity for people with multiple complex needs around here. So it was great to hear Sue talk about that innovative program in Leeds there, and about, because that's really a question which helping staff to think systemically without scaring them off by using a word like systemically. Because you're saying, well, what are the spaces of opportunity? Not just internally that we provide, that's part of the question to think about. We might have control over those areas, but also externally. What are the spaces of opportunity out there in society? Jobs, housing, etc., friendships. That example of someone who just thought, giving someone a home isn't enough. It's like an empty shell. People want relationships, don't they? People want relational safety, to feel valued, belonging to something. These are really complex but important issues because human beings want to belong, don't we? And we'd rather belong to a group of people who are abusing us than be completely on our own and isolated on an island. sadly. So we need opportunities for people to transition from one world to another. So here's a few other things that I integrate into my training program for people. From America, this is the pre-treatment approach. Jay Levy, I've had the privilege of knowing him for a few years now, about using a lot of ideas about how do you reach out to people and help them transition from rough sleeping into support and services in the world of getting on with their life. He talks about a number of things, about how the importance of relationship formation. How do you build trust with people who've had their trust broken for years? It's really, important but difficult, because any work that actually happens, people can and do recover from complex trauma all the time. But the turning point is based around a relationship of trust with a human being that helps you reflect and start to do things in a different way. It's the relationship that matters. He also looks at these other areas about how to promote safety, how to facilitate change, and supervision or co-vision is very important to reflect on the work we do. I also draw on a lot of the ideas and practices from trauma-informed practice, which are really important to understand. And it was mentioned earlier, wasn't it? The ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences studies, are very helpful. So we help people to understand the learning from that. But there's a criticism of the Adverse Childhood Experiences, isn't there? Which is that it doesn't talk about adverse community experiences. So there's some of the things we talk about: safety, empowering, choices, collaboration, and trust. And then what I wanted to also importantly mention is the power threat meaning framework. And so I'm on the national steering committee for that. I chair the subgroup, and it's an alternative to diagnosis. But I think this is crucial to have something like this framework integrated into your approach, because it highlights the links between personal, family, community distress and wider issues arising from social inequalities and injustice. And it calls for these root causes of emotional and psychological distress to be addressed in the interest of everybody. And it offers an alternative to psychiatric diagnosis. And to give you a flavor of what it talks about, it says what's happened to you in terms of how has power operated in your life. So we help staff to think about this. It also says, how did it affect you, and what kind of threats are there going on now in the past to getting your needs met? What meaning did you make of it? And what was your threat response? So maybe your threat response is an understandable reaction to feeling your needs weren't going to be met, or it threatened the kind of abuse that was happening or is happening now. And you understand them rather than symptoms of a disorder. It's an alternative to that medical model approach, which is another thing often people get trapped in, diagnosis, etc. This is saying it makes sense that maybe I'm acting in this way because it's an understandable threat response. It's a strengths-based approach, and it's linked to story, which is why I kind of think it's really important to talk about personal narrative approaches. They're the kinds of power that are going on. Just to draw things to a close now: legal, economic, and material power. It helps staff to think about physical power, coercive power, ideological power, sets of ideas out there like racism, other sets of ideas about class that are often not spoken about, interpersonal relationships like domestic violence, and social and cultural capital. They're just a couple of clips from this this image that I've kind of come up with. I like images because I'm very dyslexic, so I like pictures basically. So it's a picture about going on a quest. You name the quest. We want to go on a quest where we help really can change things around radically, I think. And that's me really. I think that's drawing to a close. I was trying to share a few of my thoughts about the program I'm delivering at the moment to staff. Do contact me at ray.middleton@ladderforlife.com if you want to chat to me about it. As you can see probably from my presentation, I'm passionate about this kind of thing. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and hope you found that useful and helpful.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Dr. Ray.